Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our November CPE event, a cybersecurity panel or a panel with cybersecurity leadership. This month's event is a special event. It's in partnership with Fontbonne University. And so first and foremost, I would like to welcome all the Fontbonne students, staff, and alumni who are joining us today for the event. Welcome to one of the monthly ISACA St. Louis educational events. We do these every month, and we're very, very happy to have you with us this month. Today's discussion is a panel. It'll be moderated by Fontbonne cybersecurity professor, Dr. Anwar, who you can see on the screen. And we have three cybersecurity leaders from the St. Louis area who will be on this panel with us today. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Anwar to moderate the discussion and introduce our speakers. Dr. Anwar.
Thank you, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zahid Anwar, an associate professor in the Math and Computer Science Department at Fontbonne University. For the past 4 years, Fontbonne University has hosted a fall breakfast meeting of ISACA. We will miss the breakfast, but the students will definitely benefit thanks to Adam Sommer and his team for bringing us together in this virtual setting. And thanks to all who have joined us for this cyber panel discussion with cybersecurity leadership. So the world is moving in a different direction now, and with the job market has also been altered. Now, as an instructor specializing in cybersecurity, I'm witnessing firsthand how our graduates are being asked to take on increasingly challenging jobs, many of them in a virtual or semi-virtual capacity to tackle this changing cybersecurity landscape. So we are excited to bring you an incredible panel this afternoon to shed some light on how the cybersecurity market has been impacted, not just by the pandemic, but by digital transformation, laws and policies, and the shortage of talent. What changes are here to stay, and what changes might we even be grateful for in a post-pandemic world? After all, change is scary, but it's also something to be embraced. So I would now request our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. Josh Kropp is a VP at Enterprise Holdings. Sir, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So Josh Knopp, I lead the cybersecurity organization globally for Enterprise Holdings. I think everybody knows who we are, but in case you don't, the brands Enterprise Rent-A-Car, National, Alamo. We have about a dozen brands total, including car sales, fleet, truck, various different business lines. St. Louis-based company, privately held. Looking forward to the conversation here.
Thank you, Josh. We're lucky to have you. Can I request Joseph Albertar to say a few words about himself?
Yeah, thanks. So this is Joseph Albertar. I'm VP of Corporate Security Engineering at MasterCard. Again, looking forward to this conversation. I believe it's going to be fruitful for all of us. I've been with MasterCard for about 14 years, focused on, different line of businesses for providing security globally.
Thank you, Joseph. Gary Harbison. Gary?
Yes, so my name is Gary Harbison, and I am the Global Chief Information Security Officer at Bayer. I've been at Bayer for about 2 years. But prior to that, I was the Global CISO at Monsanto for about 7 years. So I joined as a part of the acquisition, and in January 2019 took over as the Global CISO at Bayer with responsibility for all of our divisions and functions around the world. While Bayer is headquartered in Germany, I'm located in St. Louis, born and raised in this area, been in cybersecurity for about 25 years. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So great to have you, Gary. I think it's safe to say that if you want to know anything about cybersecurity, you can find it at this table or virtual table. So to get the conversation started, I'm going to ask a few open-ended questions. During the discussion, if the audience could please submit any questions, clarifications that they have for our panelists in the chat window, we will try and address those. And in addition, we will save time at the end to open the floor for direct conversation with our panelists. Gary, I'm going to come back to you actually for our first question. So 2020 has been a very strange year, one that many of us would like to forget or maybe move on from. So it's fun to look forward to what 2021 may have in store for us. Now, the way I understand it, digital transformation is the use of technology, any sort of technology that helps improve your business. Prior to 2020, technologies like cloud adoption, IoT, AI was already picking up quite a bit of steam. So my question to you is, what are some of the significant upcoming digital transformation initiatives across the industry and their impact on cybersecurity programs?
Sure. Very good question. And I think if you surveyed all of the major companies around the world, I would imagine almost every one of them would tell you they have some digital transformation initiative in place, or they've already been working on that for some time. And really the driver for this is, as you look at business capabilities that have been done manually in the past, or decisions that were made through intuition can now be automated, can innovate faster, can make better decisions with data and analytics. So the upside, and then really embracing the cloud in terms of speed to deliver new capabilities and applications and platforms to the company as well as their customers. So the advantage is there for digital transformation for every company. And what that really results in is an increasing importance in cybersecurity. As you take processes that in the past were done maybe manually, or that you could have manual backup processes for, and you digitize those and rely on data and IT systems to make decisions and execute your business operations, now there's an increasing possibility that a cyber event could impact a greater number of your business processes around the world. So, I think that is continuing to raise the importance of cybersecurity overall. And in fact, really no digital transformation can be successful typically without a cybersecurity transformation of that program, because typically we built our cybersecurity programs around our more legacy on-premise environments. So a shift to the cloud requires us to rethink our processes and our controls and other things. I think also COVID this year has driven an acceleration of the use of digital capabilities as well, even by evidence of this event that we're on right now, which is people are working from their homes or from anywhere. They're using collaboration tools and video conferencing and other things to work. And I think that will be continued on in some way, shape, or form, because I think most companies have seen an advantage and are trying to take the positive out of the situation we've been in with the pandemic. But again, I think that requires us to think differently about security and really enable our employees to work in new ways and from many different areas, not just on premise in our offices inside the firewall. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for security to really step up and take a leadership role in helping drive through digital transformation.
Thank you, Gary. Josh, would you like to add something to that?
Sure. Yeah. So So actually, I mean, where Gary's going are actually the top of mind items I had as well from digital transformation in the industry. Two specifically that I hear a lot about is around the cloud aspect, with folks doing more cloud migrations and more formalization of cloud, and of course more remote work. Now, what's also interesting is where those two intersect. So now you start getting more. To enable remote work, some folks are going down more towards a cloud-enabled path in order to accomplish that remote work capability. So it does require folks to look at security a little bit differently. And I recommend for those on the call that if it's a scenario that you have the ability to control, is to try and get out ahead of that. and try and be at the front of that innovation, be at the front of that transformation from a process at the planning level, so that, the security organization is there, kind of shifting left, if you will, in that development process and helping set expectations of what security controls may be needed moving forward as those transformative efforts are being defined. One consideration is a lot of folks, especially, moving from that legacy kind of on-premise environment, moving more towards a cloud-enabled space, is people have preferred tool sets. They have policies. They'll have, security frameworks, security policies in place that say what controls need to be in place where. And sometimes folks challenge, how do we do that in a cloud environment, right? So think of like an Amazon scenario, AWS scenario, where it's like, you can't just, it's not easy to just throw firewalls in front of some of these cloud infrastructures. And so looking at your security policies from the capabilities rather than the security technologies that enable those capabilities. And what I mean by that is make sure that you have policies and you're helping set the expectations that, we still have the same base level capability that we're trying to drive in the cloud space. We just might have a different way to meet it. So going back to that firewall analogy is, maybe you can't throw a Palo Alto or Checkpoint firewall in front of your Amazon space. But what you're really going at, the core control there is, restriction of network access, right, at the most fundamental level. And so you're going to be able to do that with other types of controls. So that's important to help start shifting people's mindsets, both inside of the security organizations and with the teams that are defining those transformative strategies, is we can do these things in a secure manner. The cloud world has moved enough forward that there's some reasonable security capabilities out there now. It's just going to look different. And so it does take some work to get people's minds in that position that they need to think differently about these things moving forward and kind of break themselves free of those classic legacy tool set models, and be looking at a different set of tool set, not just a cloud enabled, but a hybrid capable tool set, where it takes time to migrate to cloud infrastructures, and it might take, depending on the organization, it might take a year, it might take 5. And so just being cognizant that you're going to have to bridge that gap for an amount of time is just worth keeping fresh in mind.
So I really like that. It's not just about technology, but also policies. And I love that firewall example that you gave, Josh. Follow up on that question, on that comment that you made, that it's the people's mindset that we would have to change. Do you think that's one of the biggest barriers to the digital transformation projects? Or do you see other barriers as well?
Yeah, I think, well, it is a meaningful barrier. Anytime there's transformation implies that it's going to be significant, right? Otherwise, it's just a change. And so when we're talking about transformation, just in general terms, again, it implies that there is some sort of fundamental shift in behavior that's going to be required. Otherwise it's just an upgrade, or, you're implementing some new infrastructure or something. But I do think that there is there's change management aspects required around behavioral change, around perception change, and people's way of thinking that comes along with any sort of digital transformation effort. There are other changes, other potential roadblocks as well that people have to be cognizant of, like, the technology. Is it going to do what it says it's going to do? When you say digital transformation, you start thinking kind of where Gary was going to, about a lot of automation and technology-based processes that could be complex, and there's going to be some bugs to work out. And so there's also an aspect of patience that may need to be communicated to whomever the user of that transformative technology is going to be.
Yeah, and to add to that, that's a good point, Josh. To add to that, I think teams and companies that are going into digital transformation must go into this with eyes wide open, into having a realistic expectation, to Josh's point about may not be a day or 2 or 2 or 3 years. just every company is going to have its own boundaries and its own restrictions and budget and whatnot. So going into with a realistic expectation, but also using it as an opportunity to truly enhance and advance a particular topic. You're not just going to use the technology to remake a process into a digital form. I think if you do that only, then you're really missing on a great opportunity. Taking this digital transformation and using the opportunity to look into efficiencies in your processes and make it better as you look into it, specifically as you're looking into cybersecurity. There's many areas of the legacy platforms and processes that developed over the years that never got looked at through a good magnifying glass from a security perspective, because security wasn't, sitting on the table at that time during the architecture discussion, which we've seen that a lot in our industry. So having the opportunity, using the opportunity to advance your platforms, advancing your systems and processes, this is the time to do it, is when you go through it, is having a strategic vision and executing against it. Otherwise, you're going to be flattering over time.
Yeah, and I think too, the opportunity right now going through this transformation and shifting to a cloud-based environment is a good chance as well to evaluate our cybersecurity strategies. And, there's a lot of different models. You hear people talk about zero trust, for instance, or more of this kind of borderless network design as we're starting to go into the cloud and across several service providers. So I think there's an opportunity to shift away from our past philosophies of a very perimeter-based castle and moat philosophy of building a big wall around our environment and assuming everything outside is bad and everything inside is good, and we focus on catching all the bad things, because we've got to be right every time in that scenario, and an attacker only has to succeed once. But if you shift to driving more trust into every interaction in your environment, then you have a much higher degree for success, and that can be aided by some of these shifts that we're talking about around going to the cloud and implementing a more modern identity and access management stack, and just changing our philosophy as a part of the transformation.
Thank you. So from this discussion, it looks like cloud is one of the big transformations that we will see coming up in the new year. And I really like Gary's point about rethinking. It's no longer about putting up big walls and just looking at perimeter security. This a very nice word on zero trust that I learned today. Okay, so I know Joseph mentioned policy and regulations. And so that's about, I would like us all to touch on this topic more. So we know that cyber in itself is a domain for conflict, and innovation is actually moving faster than we are able to keep up with it. And policymakers are sort of jogging along behind, trying to catch the bus and trying to think about how to respond to this. So what is the impact on cybersecurity of these emerging policies and regulations that are coming up, not just here locally, but around the world? Gary, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, this is what we're seeing is a positive in that, the countries around the world are focusing on how to help improve the situation for cybersecurity and privacy. But what we see is it's being handled somewhat differently around the world. So each country or region is starting to come out with emerging cybersecurity laws and privacy laws, and China has a new cybersecurity law. Russia is coming out with one. Germany is coming out with one. You've got GDPR privacy and in Europe. And even if you look within the United States, privacy is handled more at a state level. So you probably got 48 different sets of privacy laws and regulations just in the United States alone. So, if you look at for global companies that are operating around the world, it is complex to continue to track and maintain the understanding of the requirements everywhere you operate, and then deploy globally consistent services around the world, because you do sometimes have to account for some very specialized local requirements. And this is something I think everyone's dealing with. It takes a lot of effort to keep up on that, but the best focus I've seen or approach has been really to have a strong partnership with your legal teams around the world so that they can help you interpret it and understand those requirements. And then really getting to embracing a common unified controls framework where you've got one set of controls that could be mapped to those various regulations. Because if we try and have a control set for every law or regulation around the world, managing that is going to be difficult. But if you have one set of technical controls that you map to those requirements, by managing those controls and understanding your maturity, you can then easily report on how you're doing for compliance for each of these laws and regulations. So now I think there's a proactive piece to partnering with your legal team and just industry groups to understand the emerging changes, but then there's an operational piece on making sure that we do this as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Joseph, would you like to add?
To add to that, thanks, Gary, is where Gary touched on how you look at building things. So, the old monolithic approach of building systems is where I think many companies going to find themselves getting away from. The big old monolithic mothership type of approach that cannot be broken up is really something of the past. I think when we start taking on these unsoils type of approach, and we're seeing in the past few years more come in, and we believe more will come in as more countries will join the fray of getting and protecting their citizens' data. I think that approach is going to have to be modified, and we're going to have to look, outside the box for innovative way of how to deploy our technology systems in different regions, and also think about what it takes to secure it, but also, to Gary's point, operate it, manage it, and staff it. Those go all hand in hand when you engineer and architect and deploy a software, a tool, or a system. Then you really need to think about, as you're designing it, is also what it's going to take you to operate it, and also the staff, because most, if not all, unsoils also demand that some of the management be on soil too, some of the staffing be on soil and whatnot. So you got to keep that in mind as you're looking into how to address the security of the data. And keep in mind, when we're talking about security, there is, security is about safeguarding the data, where privacy is more about safeguarding the user identity. And you can tell naturally there is an overlap between the two. And while we're evolving more into the security of protecting against, the unauthorized access. And that's where globally, as we start to go into soil, we need to think about how do we not just deploy on soil, we have the data, how we protect it, but how to also protect it from, breaches and whatnot globally and locally. I'll pause.
I think that, and one comment to build off that, I think Joe highlights a very good point in that we're talking about laws and regulations, but as you get into Europe, there's also the Workers' Council. And so the employment laws in some of those countries are very specific about what kinds of things you can and can't do as it comes to impacting your employees. So even things like maybe securing or locking down USB drives or running data loss prevention tools, those have to be done in coordination with the works councils to make sure that the employee is protected and make sure we're not monitoring things that aren't needed to protect the company. And I think Joe touched on that a bit, and that's a very good point. Another added complexity and another partnership that has to be maintained to operate there.
Yeah, and I'll add on that, agreed on those fronts, as well as the regionalization aspect of it. And, when you're looking at the cybersecurity aspect of a lot of these privacy regulations, and not to undervalue the work, but The security aspect is a little more straightforward, at least in my opinion, in that there are complexities. There are things that you have to look at regionally. And yeah, if you start having to look at potential requirements of data localization, then suddenly you might be breaking your data architecture up such that you have data in a broader spread, which now means more assets to protect, right? So that does add complexity, and those are things I know that have kept all of us up at night on this call, and things that we've had headaches from. But where some things at least seem a little, quite a bit more onerous is in what some of these privacy regulations are, and not to dispute the rights or wrongs of the regulations, just matter of fact, is the need to be able to catalog or categorize what we can do with the data that we have. And that becomes very cumbersome, quite frankly, in that, for example, if we have a profile, a loyalty profile for one of our customers, that's a frequent renter, we have their name, we have their address, we might have the history of what kind of cars they've rented. Then what can we do with that data per those privacy regulations? And so now not only do we have to protect the data and be able to track the data flow, we also have to keep an inventory of what we can do with each data element. And that's where things start getting a little more interestingly complex. There's also, with a lot of the privacy regulations, have requirements around the consumer's right to know what information you have. And so they can both, GDPR, CCPA, other regulations depending on their global region is, as the consumer has the right to go to the company and say, well, tell me all the information you have about me. And, that can be onerous as well. That can, in some cases, can be a manual process. And it gets more interesting, especially for financial organizations. I know some folks that have to work through is, they might get a request where a consumer says, hey, I want you to, in effect, forget everything you know about me, right? I don't want you to have any of my information anymore, and I don't want to use it for anything. But if they're servicing a mortgage for that person or a car loan, then there's business functional information they have to have. They might be required by law to have. So the administrative aspect of those privacy legislations just adds another level of complexity from inventorying that data, understanding the data flows, categorization of that data, approval of who can do what with that data, getting consumer consent. So it's just another set of complexities that have to be worked through.
Oh, those are a lot of complications Josh mentioned. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I failed to mention really one key component that I think you're going to run into as you go on soil and deal with the on soil and nationalism type of things is really kind of keep your eye on your third-party vendors that you deal with. A lot of people assume that if I am deploying a software using a third-party tool in the United States, that's automatically that tool is going to be deployed and used in a different nation. That is really not true. If you take, for example, the case of China, cryptography and certain type of in China. So you're going to have to figure out a alternative to the solution you deployed in the U.S. versus other regions. So that's another element of you need to keep an eye on is any third-party tools that you've used in a particular region may not necessarily be applicable or allowed to be used in a different region. You're going to have to find alternatives early and upfront.
Thank you. That was definitely it's hair-raising. There's so many complexities Josh touched upon. Having all these industries like financial industries having to deal with the requests from consumers, to about the privacy of their information, and then Joe mentioned about international all the problems that rise when you have this equipment, you're taking these components and then deploying them across the world. So that so all that lends us to our next question is the skill gap, right? So it has been widely observed that there is a skill gap in cybersecurity, and from what we just talked about, seems not just the technical aspects of cybersecurity but the legal aspects as well. Gary said we have to work very closely with the legal team. And so every available data source on this topic, whether it be surveys of cybersecurity professionals and or quantification of open job positions, confirms what we already know, and that there's this tremendous gap between the supply and demand for cybersecurity professionals. And so now there are a number of initiatives underway at the national and the global level, I would say, to address the supply part of this problem. Right. So, namely, we have these formal educational programs, professional training, certifications, even competitions to turn over those rocks and identify where the talent may be. However, any reasonable projection in the near future still suggests that the gap is not going to close anytime soon. Some say that we don't have so much as a skills gap, but it's in fact a communication gap between what the employers think that they're looking for and the talent that's available to them. So what does our panel think about this perspective, and could you shed some light on what organizations are trying to do and address the skills gap? Oh, and who was
I'll start.
Sure.
So I think we need to take kind of step back when we're talking about the gap. The gap is not something new. We've known about this gap for a few years now, but I think we need to kind of look back on where the gap come from, and it's really for what we talked about earlier is the lack of attention to cybersecurity in the past. So we're really playing catch up. And that kind of leads into this gap that we're in. Many initiatives and many companies in the past have really didn't allocate and prioritize cybersecurity as a key component of the major initiatives. It was really an afterthought. And as the evolution of digitalization have happening and more into the cloud and whatnot caught up with us, I think a lot of companies find themselves in a hole trying to figure out how to bring cybersecurity, especially now that, with a lot of the breaches and visibility to it, to bring cybersecurity to the front. That by itself have created a gap. And then in return, if you look at the reaction to many of the universities and whatnot to be able to supply that demand or fill that gap is going to take time. It's going to take, a 4-year degree to kind of get from A to B to Z for a student to catch up to that. With that, you're going to find that a lot of companies, a lot of cybersecurity professionals, actually see them right now, actually not starting from cybersecurity, they're starting from the IT type of background. They're coming in from the IT into the cybersecurity to fill that gap because, again, there is a shortage in the supply of security professionals that comes out of the academia, just like Fontan, that be able to fill it. So when you look at the gap, when you're looking at that, you're really going to look at it more holistically into how we got here. But most importantly is you cannot just fill cybersecurity all in holistically as one. Cybersecurity composed of many pillars that make security. And any company that is going to be looking at that need to first, just like we talked about the digital strategy, need to think about what their strategy is, where they're going, where is the evolution of their company, are going to cloud, are they on-prem, what type of strategy they have that should also be taken into account as they figure out what type of cybersecurity professionals they're going to need, because the skill set and the expertise that comes on board will help drive their strategies, especially around the topic we just talked about for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think some very good points, Joe. And I think, as you said, if we look at really how we got to where we are today, a lot of this is because, when I started on my career journey 25 years ago, there weren't really degree programs available in cybersecurity. And I started my career at Scott Air Force Base over in Illinois working for the U.S. government. And most of the security people that I met over the years started with typically either government or financial services, because they were typically a little bit ahead in terms of prioritizing cybersecurity, as Joe was saying. So, but we weren't really creating enough professionals at a fast enough pace. And then suddenly, as the demand just exponentially exploded, then as universities started trying to, spin up degree programs, and as other programs and certifications were spinning up, it just wasn't happening quickly enough to keep up with the ever-growing demand. And then as you look today at, as we talked about the complexity of technologies and transformation and laws and regulations around the world, the problems that we have to solve are getting more complicated, which requires people who can really think through and think creatively on solutions. So, I think it's just, we're still dealing with a deficit, and that's why I think there's been great progress on a lot of the universities and the degree programs and other initiatives, but we've still got to address this deficit and move faster. I also think that cybersecurity has traditionally been not been very good about making sure we're looking at diversity and inclusion overall. This is an area where we should look into how do we bring diverse talent into this space and help people understand. Everyone a lot of times thinks of security as a very technical and complicated thing. In the end, there's many different roles in cybersecurity. There are very technical roles if you're doing incident response or malware reverse engineering or forensics, but there's also roles in risk management and engagement with the business and the awareness space, where different talents and skills and expertise can be of help in security. And in the end, if you have a strong foundation of knowledge that you're bringing in, almost anyone can learn cybersecurity. It's having the right mindset on how you think about problems and challenges. And if you come in with a deep technical expertise that's fairly broad, that's going to serve you very well, because understanding how something can be compromised, you have to first understand how it works. So I think some of it's just helping people understand the opportunities that are there, the different types of roles, and that this isn't something that should be intimidating, that if you have a passion for it and if you have a mind that can look at challenges in a unique way, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll add there, Joseph and Gary both had a couple of good items here that I just want to pick on here or add on to Joseph talked about how information security is in effect multi-domainal, right? There are as anyone that's looked at like a CISSP certification or CISM, you know that, right? There are different types of domains inside of information security that all have different skill sets. And where, Gary, I absolutely agree with his comments of the mindset. And so, there's a different type of mindset that's required. And so, yes, I'll say there is obviously a skill set gap. That's quantifiable, it's measurable, we know that. But I don't know, is there a gap in qualified mindsets? And so because there are different domains of expertise or different domains of areas of knowledge inside of the information security space, there are roles and functions that are more mindset driven and less, technical knowledge, or rather you can fill a vessel with the knowledge, right? If you can train somebody up, then what you need to be looking for is less that skill set and more of who is a candidate that has the right mindset, who is somebody that's going to be able to think the way we need a security practitioner to think, who's somebody that's going to be able to learn and gain that knowledge and be a strong contributor to the overall effort that we're trying to drive. I've had to challenge my organization just based on, if you want to put out job requirements that say you need to have 10 or 15 years of experience, well, that's going to significantly limit the candidate pool, right? Because everybody's looking for, of course, everyone wants somebody with 10 or 15 years experience. But as we know, it's not there. And so what I've challenged my organization is to start thinking differently about the hiring and look at the candidate. If we've got a good quality candidate and we just need to train them up, then that's probably better for us long term than finding somebody that's just very skilled, but maybe doesn't have the full mindset that we're looking for. So obviously you can't apply that to every role, right? There are areas where you just need to have that experience and that expertise and that technical acumen. But I do challenge folks to at least consider that, where you can look more for that right mindset. Look at different types of industries. Look at, creative industries or creative mindsets or, communication disciplines. And just try and think out of the box of what is the function? What does it really need to do? Do I have the time to train somebody up on this? And are you making, and also, is it a short-term need or is it somewhere, more of a long-term need? So there's just a few different ways that you can look at to try and, think creatively in addressing some of those needs.
And don't force skill set in the wrong group. So if you got somebody with an analytical type of thinking, there is areas within security, cybersecurity, that they fit in. What I have seen in different organizations is an individual with the right skill set is forced into a different role just because that role is needed. Not that skill set. Back to Josh's point, you got to really think about what is it that you're trying to accomplish, what role you're trying to fill, and then find the skill set to match it. But don't force a skill set in a role just because you want somebody to fill that role from a cybersecurity, because the individuals filling that role is really going to have an impact on how that group function and what you get out of that skill set. So it's really critical, just like with IT, really, is don't force the wrong skill set in the wrong group, because that will have a long-term implication for that individual and for your strategy that you're going to map out.
Yeah, and I think also too, for, because I know we have some students on the line as well. I mean, most important is your passion for the space and your desire and willingness to learn. And I've got two individuals in my team. One was actually a scientist, PhD scientist on the R&D side, and one was an API application engineer. And both had approached me over the last few years about their interest in cybersecurity. And what was most impressive about both of them is they really took ownership of their career and their development. When they came to talk to me, we talked a bit about the space and the types of things they're interested in. I recommended books, certifications, different readings, and they went away, took ownership, read the books, read everything, came back with more questions. We talked about more things, and they continued to act on it, and we ended up bringing them both into our organization, and they're just two of our rock stars on the team, highest performers, just because they enjoy the space. They're constantly learning. They bring a fresh perspective, and they've really taken ownership of their journey. And more than anything, that's what's going to make anyone successful in cybersecurity or any space is, really just taking this to heart, diving in, learning it, and getting excited about it.
Very excellent points. I have questions, but I know we are constrained for time. And like Joe mentioned, there are in this room many soon-to-be cybersecurity professionals, and I know a burning question on everyone's mind is these job opportunities. So with this, I'd like to open up for questions, and we have some questions here already in our chat window. So I will, on this last topic that we were just discussing, we have a question from Tim Jacks. What are your pain points in terms of hiring new folks? Tim, would you like to, it's a long question, would you like to address this to the panel yourself? You can just unmute your mic and ask.
Dr. Anwar, I'm not sure we have that functionality turned on for the participants. If we just read the questions.
Sure, thank you. So what are your main points in terms of hiring new folks? What kinds of positions are you having trouble filling? For example, entry level, senior tech, DevOps, middle management, executive, or have you seen a hiring freeze due to COVID?
I can jump in and start the conversation on that one. So I think the areas, at least that I've seen the more trouble hiring, tends to be more the architect space and the senior leader, kind of that management executive level space, especially in areas of, like identity access management or security operations. So the entry level, again, is because we're trying to think differently. We've found pipelines for bringing some of those entry level or mid level folks in that, where can we retool folks? So we've been doing okay in that space, but again, it's the more tenured type of leadership or security experts that just have, again, sometimes you just need somebody with 10, 15, 20 years of experience. From a decision-making standpoint that has that breadth of experience. So that's at least the view that I've seen.
Yeah, and I would say that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
I agree. But I would add to that is that really the challenge is in all different levels. I mean, again, it's back to what you're trying to fill. We have challenges filling all of these levels because we're looking in some areas for a specific skill set to accommodate a specific, development effort or initiative that we're trying to accommodate. So all of these are there, but also don't forget that the challenge sometimes is not local, but you got to have regional and global issues too that are facing companies. I may be able to find an engineer in St. Louis, but if I have a global footprint, I may not have the same skill set or pool of skill set available in Dublin or India or South Africa. So it varies in how to look at the skill set based on the region and the global areas where that skill set is needed based on the development area that's requiring that skill set. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Very good points, Joe. And I think, I would see both had very good comments. And I would first say, I don't think I've seen hiring freezes as a part of COVID. I think probably all companies are experiencing some sort of impact from COVID. So that may have slowed down hiring. But at the same time, many of these cybersecurity roles, the threats aren't stopping during this pandemic. They're sometimes elevating and getting worse. So I haven't seen companies stop that, but they've maybe been a bit more selective on timing, but I still see the job market continuing to move forward. In terms of the types of roles, I think some of what was mentioned, Josh mentioned around some of the more senior roles like a security architect that are tackling those bigger problems can sometimes be difficult to find. Then there's also some of the very specialized skill set areas like, someone who understands some of the AppSec or cloud security space, or, data scientist is a hard to find skill in IT overall. So then looking for a data scientist who knows cybersecurity is like looking for a unicorn. Or if you look at threat intel, having somebody who understands strategic threat intelligence at a geopolitical level globally is a very unique skill set. So I think there's some very unique ones that are harder to find, but I think Joe also touched on an interesting point as well, is you've got to think about globally where you need these roles and what flexibility do you have to allow people to work where they are. So if you try and limit yourself to certain geographic locations or get people to relocate, that may be more difficult. But if you can let someone work from where they are, sometimes you're able to tap into some additional talent pools and pipelines there. So I think there's still a ton of opportunity out there.
And we seem to have a follow-up question for Joe from Matthew Mannett. Joe has attributed the skill gap to not enough attention being brought to cybersecurity in the past. In the past year, how much has information security been prioritized, especially with the digital transformation due to COVID?
It's hard really to put how much or percentage. If you look at um, the past 10 years and you look at the various initiatives and the evolution of technology, and I think this is what you also need to consider too, is the evolution of how the technology to play the factor. So in the past, if you look at some companies, you will have a different type of platform, like, for example, mainframe. Yeah. The need for cybersecurity, if you are a shop that had mainframe type of technology, would have been so much less than a company that would have a need for development of agile or web-based kind of development. So that kind of varied. But also what happened is even companies that have the mainframe and have this, type of legacy type of systems and applications are evolved over the past few years, where the need and the demand for more robust, more customer friendly type of applications and API and whatnot have increased, which brought with it the demand for cybersecurity to be able to secure the new development and where the data, which is now, instead of having the data centralized in one location and it's easy to secure it, now you have data spread through, God's creation. And now you're going to have to worry about access and protecting access to that data. So I would say, again, it's hard to pinpoint timing of that, of when the demand and the attention to cybersecurity is started or not, but I would say maybe for the last, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, I've seen the increase in awareness to cybersecurity and the need for cybersecurity to be front and center in any initiative and to be upfront part of the architecture and design of any system.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's not just that attention wasn't paid to cybersecurity. The world has changed around us, and crime has existed since the beginning of time, and this is just the latest manifestation of how to execute that. I mean, 20 plus years ago, when, as Joe said, in the world of mainframes, and you had more closed networks and just operating mainframes, if you read the IBM Rainbow series or something like that, was complicated in and of itself, much less trying to secure that. But it was just a different set of threats, and companies didn't rely on IT systems as heavily to operate their businesses. As all of that has changed, criminals tend to go where the opportunity is. So as more becomes digital, they start to prey on that as the next evolution of crime, which then means companies have to acknowledge that that's a growing threat. So paying the same amount of attention to cyber 20 years ago probably wasn't needed, but now it is. And the threats we face today, 20 years ago, I remember it was people followed underground forums that tracked website defacements, and that was big news when a company got a website defaced. Now that's like a daily occurrence, and it's not real high on my worry list. I mean, we've got people with criminal charges brought forward by federal law enforcement for espionage that's impacting nation state, impacting each other at a geopolitical level. This is or cyber warfare implications, or physical and health safety as you get into medical devices and cars that can be manipulated remotely. So the world changed around us, and that's what's driven the importance around cyber, because this was the next avenue of crime and ulterior motives to do some of that.
Yeah, I know. I think that is absolutely a fantastic answer. And I think, though, Joseph, you mentioned that maybe it's hard to quantify this. I think, there's probably some smart students here on the call that if you wanted a project, I bet you might be able to quantify it based just on the amount of vendor calls that Gary and Joseph and I get on a daily basis. And if you plot those over time, over the past year, I think you would see that there is an increase in security awareness in the world right now. But, and while I'm joking a bit there, only a bit, the reality is that, it's a supply and demand scenario, right? And so the market has recognized the opportunity, has recognized the need for increased security. And there are so many companies, so many startups in the space now. And vendors are really looking at it, especially as companies are looking to do some of the transformative efforts that we already talked about, cloud migrations, reducing infrastructure costs, and as compute platforms continue to get more efficient, they're looking for where is that next big revenue stream. And, if there wasn't a need, then that revenue stream wouldn't be able to be self-fulfilled. So, there is, you can kind of look at some market forces to see too that there's evidence of that increased need for cybersecurity.
Okay, we have, I think, just enough time to answer a couple more. I'm going to group some questions here which seem to be related. So Devon and Al-Qasim are asking, what areas can I look into to increase diversity of talent? Or is it better to specialize into skill sets that fit the region? And are professional certificates like Security Plus an advantage for the applicant for entry level?
Yeah, I'd say some of the certifications can have value for entry level. I'm sure, and I know we've only got about 2 minutes left here, but at least the way I look at certificates is it's just a way to prove knowledge. So it's not necessarily a requirement that somebody have a certificate. They tend to be nice to haves. But Security Plus is something that is at least can be a differentiator when comparing to other entry-level candidates that maybe don't have it, right? Especially when looking at like interns or folks coming straight out of a university program. They might have a fantastic degree, but not having some of that real-world applicable knowledge or experience. So in that case, some of those certificates can be a differentiator.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think that, some of it also depends on, as Josh said, what phase in your career you're in. If somebody's been in cybersecurity for 15 years, I'm going to look at their CV or resume more on what they've accomplished and the types of roles they've had and experiences, as Josh said. If you're earlier on in your career, that certification can help bolster your resume a bit and demonstrate your knowledge and skills where maybe you don't have as long a tenure of experience to show there. So, I think they definitely play a role, but it's not something that I look for in every role in every situation.
And to answer the first part of the question regarding, what area to specialize in, I think that's really a loaded question. It's a preference. I think first and foremost, you need to get familiar with the landscape of security holistically to understand what areas of security, the pillars that make security, and then from there start exploring where you have the passion. Is it cryptography? Is it access? Is it analytical? Is it, to Gary's point, data mining, data analyst? So it kind of, you gotta understand the landscape of security first and the pillars that make security, and then from there trying to find your passion of what you think will fit the type of strategy you want to go into for your career.
Okay, thank you all. Looks like our timer is up, and this was a very valuable discussion, and it has given us insight into the cybersecurity programs. And now let's see how we reflect on it to reshape the cybersecurity landscape or specify educational landscape for a safer tomorrow. Thank you, and to you, Adam.
Yes, well, Dr. Anwar, Gary, Josh, Joseph, on behalf of all of our members in our chapter, thank you for your time and your insights today. And a special thank you to Fontbonne University, including all the students, staff, and alumni who've joined us today. I will remain on the line for about 10 minutes past the end of this event to address any general member questions related to today's event or any other chapter business. Separately, if there's any students who would like to ask questions of our board, please feel free to stay on after and we'll happily have that dialogue. For those questions the panel is not able to answer, we do have those in text and we'll provide those to Dr. Anwar after the event. Otherwise, that concludes today's session, and thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
For those of you still on, if there's any members with any member questions, any general topics you would like to ask, please just put them in the Q&A. Like I said, I'll hang on for a little bit. and we'll happily address those as we have with all the previous ISACA CPE events. So any chapter business we'll happily address. Tricia, thank you for sharing that Magellan Health is hiring InfoSec. For those who don't know, we do have a LinkedIn group for the chapter, and if anyone would like to share job postings, they're welcome to do that on that LinkedIn group as well. We do CPEs for this webinar. For everyone who registered who's a chapter member, you registered using your ISACA ID. The CPEs, as with all chapter events, are automatically uploaded to your ISACA account. All you have to do is log into your ISACA.org account and you click accept, and those will be applied to whichever certifications you select. So the CPEs are done automatically for you, and they'll be force posted to your ISACA account. Just give us a few days. It's a manual process and we're all volunteers. But no, you do not have to submit them yourself. We do that for you. That is one of the primary reasons why you register using your ISACA ID. It enables us to do that on your behalf. If you are not an ISACA member, I know we had a lot of fun students and staff on the call today. Just send us an email separately and we will help you get the CPE's information you need if that's applicable.